everyone, it's David Ault, and I want to welcome you to The Gathering. Try a little experiment with me. I'm going to say a word that you're very familiar with, and after I say the word, I want you to pause, and I want you to see if you can get in touch with the feeling or the attitude that you have about hearing that word. You ready? Okay, the word is gratitude. Breathe. How do you feel when you hear the word gratitude? What I have played with in terms of being the role of a teacher or a spiritual leader is noticing when we numb out or go to sleep or kind of roll our eyes after we hear something, some word or some spiritual principle over and over and over again. And so what happens is that it becomes sort of conformist, and it really has the ability to lose its potency. It's not that the feeling itself or the meaning of it loses its potency. It's that our relationship to it becomes a bit of a cliche. And that's what can happen sometimes with repetition. In other words, it becomes stale. And I want to reinvigorate that for you today because I want to be a reminder of the essential nature of gratitude. It's very much like if I use the word oxygen. It's necessary. It's vital in order for us to even navigate in a conscious manner, to be alive within this human form. It's essential as oxygen. So gratitude. It's very close to Christmas, depending upon when you are viewing this. And there has been a beautiful, long-standing tradition throughout the years by a communication with a friend named Bill. So let me tell you about Bill. Bill came into my world when I was incredibly young. In fact, I was around 22, and I was a fledgling actor in New York City. I had already been there for close to a year and was feeling all of the bruises and all of the turmoil of being young and being broke and not getting anywhere in a satisfactory manner with regards to my longing to be in this acting profession. And a good friend of mine, a childhood friend of mine named Hope, was working in a film production office in an old building, a classic old building right in the heart of Times Square. And she was able to get me a part-time gig there as well. And so that was a little bit of a breathing room and relief to get some money. And I walked into this office, and it was a cast of characters. They were working on trying to produce a movie by the great writer James Kirkwood. You may know him because he won a Pulitzer Prize for co-writing the book of the musical A Chorus Line, which also won the Pulitzer Prize. James Kirkwood was a prolific novelist, and he had written several books, and one of those books they were trying to bring to the screen. So James Kirkwood was in the office a lot. The man who was assigned to be the director was in the office a lot. And the office was sort of run by a man named Brud, who had a bit of money and fancied himself a producer. And so, but in this group was also a man named Bill. And as it turns out, Bill was friends with Brud. As it turns out, Brud was an addict. And as it turns out, Bill was there to really sort of manage and oversee his friend Brud. But Bill was very skilled. Bill was a businessman, and he lived in upstate New York, and he had dabbled in quite a few things. And bought businesses, established businesses, sold them. So he had a mindset for all things business. So he was there trying to play head of finance for this production company. And here I am, this 22-year-old. And I was a gopher. I was running errands all through Manhattan for these people, along with my friend Hope. But it was an easy atmosphere in terms of being different than trying to get a waiter's job, where if you wanted to go on an audition, you needed to go on an audition for your career, you had to beg and plead to get the time off to go. In this office, that wasn't the case. They championed me. They were like, yeah, go do your thing and just come back and do XYZ. So after getting that gig, there was a lot of breathability within my life, and I started to like it. I started to love the fact that I was right in Times Square, and these old rickety windows would overlook the most famous spot in all of the world. And and I went from part time to sort of full time, which was really loosey goosey in terms of restrictions. But I learned a lot. And what was incredible and what started to happen was I was included. Like they would have creative meetings about which direction to take the script for this meeting. And I got to sit there and take notes and to listen and to be in the same room with a Pulitzer Prize winner. And but most of what developed was a friendship with Bill. Bill, the man who was there, who was this great businessman who was watching over his friend Brad. And in this time, I got my first acting gig. Well, not my first paid acting gig. And it was a sort of a 9-episode arc as an intern on a soap opera called The Doctors. And I got it from an open call. So that meant that I didn't get it through an agent. So I didn't have an agent to negotiate any kind of a contract. And I was going to sign this thing, and I was excited about it. And I remember telling everybody in this office what had happened. And Brud, the man who was the producer, who was the addict, and several of the other people who heard were like, well, you need to ask for this, and you need to ask for that. But Bill pulled me aside and he said, let me see the paperwork. And he said, just take it as is. He said, David, this is one of your first opportunities. So use that as training, as experience. Don't get too high-handed with it. And he looked it over and he said, this is good. This will be great for you. And then he said with this, use this opportunity to do your best. And then he closed with watch. Observe how not to be. Watch. Observe how not to be. And I have been in contact with and been friends with Bill since I was 22. And over time, in fact, I saw him about 6 years ago. He came to Atlanta, and I gave him a tour of the spiritual center that I was head of here. And I remember him sitting in my office, just smiling and beaming, and talking about how far life had taken both of us. Because Brud died from his addictions, and Bill couldn't save him. And the films didn't necessarily get made through that production office. And Bill relocated to Washington, D.C., where he put his business skills and his demeanor, his calm demeanor, to become a lobbyist and to become someone who began to champion the oppressive voices of people who were stricken with HIV/AIDS. You have to remember, he did this in the 80s during the Reagan administration when that wasn't even being spoken by that administration. And I'll just fast forward and say that Bill was almost single-handedly responsible for getting legislation passed, for getting programs instigated to bring life giving support, medication, and funding for all of these people who were struggling. If you know anyone who has had their journey with HIV and are on the cocktail, the life saving medicine, it's because of Bill. And so Bill and I had a tradition where, because he was so busy in Washington, D.C., and he remained there steadfast in that position all the way since the 80s. We would talk a week or two before Christmas, and we would catch up. And there were many things that Bill did for me over the years, that just amazing things. When I was a recording artist, and I recorded a song called "How Could Anyone," Bill was not a religious man, but he always wanted to know what I was doing. And so when I was making CDs, I would send them to him. And that CD that had the song, "How could anyone ever tell you you were anything less than beautiful," really kind of got to him. And here's what Bill did. Bill was so savvy in working with members of Congress, and he had already passed the Ryan White Care Act, which was a big legislation to get funding for medicine into the hands of people. But it was coming up for a second vote. Bill flew me to Washington, D.C., to a function, a dinner, where key members of Congress that were going to be voting on this bill were going to be attending. Bill hired me as entertainment for this thing. And he didn't tell me a lot. He just said, "I want you to come sing for this thing and we'll pay your way." So I went to DC and he said, "I want you to sing that song." And so I was like, that's weird to sing this song at this congressional dinner. But I did. And after I sang that song, Bill got up and made this impassioned speech about continuing and expanding the funding for this thing called AIDS, which was affecting the globe. And he got his money. And afterwards he goes, "I kind of used you." He said, "You got to know that government is theater. And when I see something that's effective, I'm going to use it." And I was like, "Great, use me." But that was Bill. He was amazing. And so, as we would call in spiritual terms, such a powerful bodhisattva, someone who, without even realizing what he was doing, was motivated in ending the suffering of other people. So, back up. We talk prior to Christmas. And so it's almost Christmas. And of course, I started to think of Bill. And Bill's, even when I saw him 6 years ago, he was an old man, or was old. Bill liked to smoke. And so smoking had taken its toll on his body. But I hadn't heard from him, or I thought, oh, I'm anticipating my annual call from Bill. So I Googled him, and that's when I learned that he had passed away at the age of 83 at the end of September. And there were these amazing, beautiful articles written about his tireless work and his activism in Washington, D.C. And kind of the silent hero, the type of people who are behind pivotal things that have changed the world. And so that happened day before yesterday, and all that night and all day yesterday, all I could do was think about Bill. All I could do was reflect upon all of the multitude of things that Bill had done for me. I started to write them all down. I was going to make a social media post about it, and I could hear Bill's voice go, "Save it. Save it for the book." And so I did a very sort of very shortened version of the power and the testament of who he was. So all of that brought up to me this idea of gratitude. and the reflection of gratitude. And I have been reflecting ever since I read the article about his passing and thinking about how we forget, such pivotal, substantial help through the vectors of all of the relationships that we have throughout our lives. When I started to really reflect, I would say that the current state of my awareness, or the current state of my spiritual maturity, could see all of those things now through a completely different lens, a lens of mature gratitude. And when I began to remember the detail, the nonstop loyal detail of how he was a friend, I couldn't help but become overcome with gratitude at how once again my life has been directed by, or salvaged, or eased by wisdom keepers that perhaps at the time I didn't see it or couldn't appreciate it. And that's the beauty of gratitude. That's where we need to become very aware of how ho-hum we become about such a potent practice. And so what Bill taught me that time when I got that acting gig, when he said, watch, observe how not to be. What I realized is that that's been a lifelong practice for me. I've somehow managed to be in positions in this experience called life with pivotal, well-named people. I've watched and seen the projections that those people go through. I've been next to fame a lot and watched how fame wasn't the end-all be-all nor the answer to ending human suffering. In fact, I've seen how it exacerbates it. I've seen all kinds of things that showed me how not to be in terms of ego, in terms of getting so lost in the acquisition of materialism that I've been blessed to be in those positions. And I'm lax in my gratitude with that. And Bill's passing reminded me of how life-saving gratitude is, because it brings back to the forefront the way in which the universe, we'll just lump it into that, has our back. The way in which the universe has our back, the tangibility of it. And so at this time of year, again, or whenever you see this, I want you to get back into the seat of attention and respect and reverence for gratitude. And I want you to begin to pause and notate, reflect upon all of the people who have been there at pivotal moments, who have mentored you in all kinds of ways. Mentored you through, are you ready for this? Contrast, in other words, observing how not to be, and gratitude and mentorship through emulation, seeing the prototypes of how key behavior that up-levels the experience for all. And so gratitude by contrast and gratitude by emulation. And so in that acting experience, there were many things that I saw where I could see where people were just sleepwalking. They had been, something that I longed to do, to be able to have a paid acting gig. People were just like phoning it in. And then seeing people who had a deep reverence for their craft. The same thing I know applies for you. You can see things that you have a longing for, and you can see people who are asleep at the wheel doing those things. And you can see people who are doing those things who are a beautiful, divine, crystal prototype of how you would aspire and want to be. Be grateful for both ends of the spectrum. Be grateful for the contrast. That's why gratitude doesn't just sit on one end of the spectrum. We can be grateful for the examples of contrast of how not to be. We can look at the stark realities of our inhumanity towards one another and actually use that as a gratitude tool and let it motivate us to be something more than that in the world. I was reading a particular post from the Ram Dass Love, Serve, Remember, and it tied into this beautifully because I saw how Bill's advice of watching and observing how not to be. Well, what is the behavior of what not to be? Where does that behavior come from? That behavior, in its origin, always comes from fear. Why would anybody hoard their good? Why would anybody demean someone else? Why would anybody be less than loving towards anyone unless it was rooted in some kind of fear, a fear of lack, a fear of unworthiness? And it gets bolstered and fueled by overacting or overarching in the protection of everything around it. And so this thing said that Ram Dass said was, you got to remember that the ego is built on fear. The ego is built on fear. And so as Bill was saying, observe how not to be, what he was really saying is observe the ego at play. You can actually remove the personality of what it's coming out of and just watch ego as an energy. Watch its division. Watch how it disrupts things, not in a good way. Watch how the neediness of it sort of sucks the oxygen out of everything. You got to remember that the ego then is built on fear. It's not built on love, it's built on fear. And it's built on this fear of, Ram Dass said, non-survival. So why do any of us operate in fear? Because there's something in there that is threatening this primal sense of survival within us. And so we build this structure of ego and this fear based upon some way to make ourselves artificially safe. What I love that Ram Dass said was, and it's a beautiful instrument actually, in order to help someone walk through duality. But the mistake then happens that if I identify with it, if I identify with the fear, then I'm fearful all the time. And I know Bill fancied himself not as a spiritual teacher, but basically what he was saying was watch fear. And don't let fear rule your life. Watch fear. Watch how not to be with fear. And so I would love for you to take the elements of all of this and do your own gratitude practice. I sat down because of Bill and began to list all of the people like Bill, some of the unsung heroes that have course corrected me, sort of gently taken my consciousness and moved it time and time and time again. It isn't necessarily a teacher. Sometimes it was a student. Sometimes the student was the teacher in disguise. There are so many different things that have played that role and continue to play that role. And what's good about doing that? What's good about that reflection of gratitude? What's good about being cautious of letting it become ho-hum is that I don't know if there's a greater tool out there in realigning ourselves with our true essential self. I don't know. It seems like it's the one size fits all spiritual tool that will align us back to our God nature. And as we understand energy more and more and more, we realize that truly what we do focus on, what becomes the conscious habit of our days is the thing that expands within our days in the world of effect. So again, the more that gratitude becomes a lifestyle, the more things we see to be grateful for. So as this year comes to an end, or again, whenever you're watching this, pause, see where you are with gratitude. And I want to encourage you to sit with that, to reflect upon all of the bills in your life and give thanks. Create a ritual around just honoring all of these people, and to know that that is an expression of God reminding us that all is well. All is well. And you are loved. And I want to thank you once again for watching and for tuning in. And if these messages speak to you, it's a joy to have developed over this last year and a half the opportunity for you to participate in Nandi, our spiritual organization. And if you feel compelled to donate and to support Right Livelihood, that you can not only do that, but you can do that and receive the benefit of a deduction because we are a 501c3. Thank you very much. You'll see the details in the text. Blessings and love. If you're watching this in real time at the season, I wish you nothing but joy and healing and things to be grateful for this holiday season. All love.